appear now that the media is effectively running the Conservative Party or the campaign, because after saying that they would not be suspending support for those two candidates, that has now happened. And a rather embarrassing aspect is that it is reported that one cabinet minister initially claimed he won around £2,000 on placing a bet, only to say, no, I was joking all along. Labour don't escape either, as I mentioned. They've got a candidate who's bet on himself to lose. Rounding it all up, LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark. Natasha.
Nick, 6 Tories, 1 Labour candidate and 6 police officers now this morning wrapped up in this election betting scandal. It's really exploded, this story, in the last 24 hours since we were last discussing it. We've now got 1 more Tory being investigated by the Gambling Commission. That's Russell George. He's a Welsh Assembly member. He's in the same sort of area as one of the other MP candidates, Craig Williams. Now, yesterday, Rishi Sunak withdrew Tory support for Mr Williams and that other Tory candidate that's running in the election, Laura Saunders, after new evidence came to light from their own Tory internal investigations. Keir Starmer asked why it had taken so long. The Prime Minister had held the party line as recently as earlier this week. Here's what the Prime Minister told an event hosted by The Sun on Monday evening.
They're really serious. They're subject to multiple independent investigations, including a police criminal investigation. It's right that nothing that I do or anyone does compromises the integrity of those investigations.
But Mr Williams insisted he had not committed any offences, and that was according to the police in Wales, who had passed all of that information back on to the Gambling Commission. He said he was still fighting to be re-elected as an MP. However, last night, Nadine Dorries, the former Tory MP, told Andrew Marr there was a rottenness at the core of the Conservative Party.
The rebuilding of the Conservative Party, which I know many people in the Conservative Party are talking about now, it has to start from the roots up, because there is a rottenness at the core. We need to reverse what has been a culture of expectation and entitlement and privilege in the Conservative Party. We need to go rebuild the Conservative Party and take it right back to what being a Conservative is, what the principles are, and the job of an MP, and the expectations.
So 2 more Tories have taken leaves of absences from their jobs at the party HQ after putting under a probe. And separately yesterday, it was revealed another 5 police officers facing a probe by the Gambling Commission. They had told the police, but they are not under active investigation at the moment. They have not been arrested. However, that's different to the other 1 protection officer from Rishi Sunak's team who has been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. And like you mentioned just there, Nick, last night, the Scottish Secretary Alister Jack, he's standing down at the next election. He insisted he was not under any investigation, but the BBC reported he had put several bets on the election date. He said that was in May, so out of the remit of the Gambling Commission, he claims he wasn't being probed. He has not been committed any sort of wrongdoing. And Nick, yesterday, perhaps the cherry on the cake, a Labour candidate was dropped by the party after he placed a bet against himself so that he would lose to the Conservatives. That's Kevin Craig. He is a lobbyist and an expert in political crisis management. He was dropped by the Labour Party. He bet he would not even win his own constituency. The Labour Party have said they will now return £100,000 of the money he has donated to the Labour Party under Keir Starmer's leadership. The party said they acted immediately. They complained that Rishi Sunak had taken 13 days to suspend his own candidates. Nick, really dominating the final days of this election campaign. Both sides now implicated. More Tories, more police. It's feeling a little bit like Partygate, as Michael Gove said at the weekend.
LBC's political editor Natasha Clark reporting. Let's bring in Sir Craig Oliver, who was Director of Politics and Communications at Number 10 under Prime Minister David Cameron, now hosts the podcast on Global Player, Desperately Seeking Wisdom, and joins me now. Sir Craig, what have you learned about Rishi Sunak or the campaign, the Conservative campaign, over the last few weeks on this issue? Good morning.
Good morning. Well, it's been painful to watch. I think anybody who's got experience in terms of this type of communications knew as soon as they heard that there had been these allegations that the Prime Minister needed to take swift and decisive action. He needed to show he was angry, but he also needed to suspend them. The problem for Rishi Sunak is he only did half of that. He showed he was angry, but he didn't suspend them. And I think it was obvious to anybody who's been involved in communications that he needed to have suspended them, to draw a line and then not have this be the running sword that it has been for the last few days. And it was obvious that he was going to be dragged to a position where he was actually going to have to finally suspend them and then look like he'd been dragged to it rather than doing it quickly, cleanly and decisively.
So, Craig, George Osborne, the former Chancellor, says his failure to act in the fashion you just said shows Mr Sunak is not a real political leader. Do you concur?
Look, I think that's harsh. I think I've worked for political leaders who found it very, very difficult to take the decisive action. If you're a political leader, you're looking at people around you and say, hang on a minute, this is maybe a bit more complicated than the media is saying. I deserve due process. I deserve a situation where there's a proper investigation. The problem is, in this toxic media environment or heady media environment at the moment, is you're never going to have the space to do that, and you just have to act. And I think that is the problem with Rishi Sunak, is why didn't you just act immediately? You had Keir Starmer saying, look, if it was one of my candidates, their feet wouldn't have touched the floor. And the problem was that there was a very, very clear and obvious comparison with another leader there. And also the reality that this was just going to drag on without a satisfactory answer from the Prime Minister.
It's great fun for us in and around Westminster. Does it bother people from Wakefield to Worthing?
I think it does. I think the reality of this story is it's not complicated or nuanced. We can all imagine if we had privileged information what we might do in terms of making some money out of it. It's an obvious thing. And I think your political editor was making the point, is that it builds on the reputation that was built up during Partygate. It looked as if the Conservative Party was in a position where it thought there was one rule for them and another rule for others. And the problem with this is it looks like there is this kind of entitlement, this sense that you don't really get it, that whether it's legal or not, you just shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. You should be focused on the problems of the country, focused on your constituency, what's right for them, instead of gambling. And I think the Alister Jack situation, it's not clear how many bets he put on or not, or whether it was a joke or not. But that's kind of the point, is don't joke about these things. It's serious. People care. Focus on the issues at hand.
How would this have been handled a few years back with you and David, now Lord Cameron?
I think we would have realised that this is a real problem. It's doubly a problem during an election campaign. You needed to suspend the candidates immediately. Is obvious where the flow of this story was going. Quick, clean, decisive action. And I think it is quite worrying that it has taken so long for people to realise that they were going to eventually be dragged to this position.
Last question. When you last spoke with Lord Cameron, how's his morale holding up?
I think pretty well. Look, he's a Conservative to the core. He wants them to do as well as they can. He's been out campaigning for the Conservative Party and wants them to do well. Look,
you must be a little puzzled with the way this is going, Craig, when you can think he was a consummate pro at this sort of stuff. He must be a little bemused.
Well, look, I can't give you information about what he's saying and thinking. I suspect if David Cameron had been Prime Minister, we wouldn't have been having an election now. I suspect he would have stayed on at D-Day, and I suspect he would have suspended people. But, that's a hypothetical situation, and it's hard to judge.